Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Marketing Mondays. This is actually Marketing Mondays number 55. So hopefully you guys are all interested in what we're going to get into today. You've got some good questions for us. As always, I'm going to ping some groups in to get some people in here. But I've got some good questions, and I'm going to basically, like I said, take a moment to get these groups pinged in. I started a little bit early, so we have a little bit of time to do that. So good to see you, Christy. Just give me a second. I'm getting some groups pinged in, and we will get going. Thanks, everybody, for coming in. Let me get this done real quick. It's always so. All right, we are set. Hey, Jerry, good to see you in here as well. By the way, for all of you guys, you probably that tune in every week, get tired of hearing this. But for anybody that hasn't been watching, I'm going to go ahead and say this. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the comments. We always take time to try to get to the comments that come in live during the broadcast. So if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the comments, and I will make a point to get to that. If you have any clarifications or additional questions about things I answer during the session, put those in the comments. I'll clarify those. I always want to give a priority to those that are here live, but we do have questions that came in during the week, and I'm actually going to get kicked off with those. But go ahead. Don't let that stop you from putting questions into the comments, and we'll get going from there. So one of the people that tunes in almost every week, Haley, sent in a question to me via DM last week after the session. And she basically asked, actually, I'm just going to read it so I don't get it wrong at all. It says, what is your take on traditional billboard advertising? How do you recommend standing out from the competition with or without it? Great question, Haley. Although, this might not fall into what we would typically talk about with regard to digital marketing. It is obviously marketing. So let's talk a little bit about billboard marketing. As far as whether it's worth it or not, I think it depends on the marketplace, and it depends a lot on the positioning of the billboard and how many other billboards are there, things like that. So billboard marketing, there's definitely a place for it, and it definitely has worked, especially in the past it's worked. Here's a couple of concerns I have about billboard marketing. A lot of people, if they're driving, they're not the ones typically paying attention or can take notes or take down some information if they do notice a billboard that they're interested in. So the people that are driving, kind of you take them a little bit out of the equation to begin with. And the people that aren't driving, a lot of them are doing what a lot of us do. They're sitting here looking at their phone while they're driving down the road. They're not looking at billboards the same way they were 15, 20 years ago. They're looking at their phones or something of that nature. But let's back up for 1 second and just say, what is your intention of the marketing? If your intention of the marketing is branding, i.e. you want people to become comfortable and familiar with your brand, not necessarily consume it or call them to action, but just get them comfortable with your brand so that they've seen your brand a lot of times and you've increased the frequency. They know who you are and they are comfortable with your brand because you've been around. Maybe a billboard fits into that because you're on a very busy road and somebody's going, if they're driving, it's the way they take to work. They're going to potentially see your billboard every day, even if they don't see it and act on it. Like it's not a call to action that they're acting on. They're seeing it every day. They're seeing your brand. They're seeing your logo. They're getting an idea of what your company does. And it gives a little bit of credibility, a little bit of brand stability to your company. So if your intention is that and not necessarily to try to call them to action, i.e. make a sale about something specific, it very well might work. If your billboard is something to try to get them to act, like, hey, call this number or go to this website to get more information or things like that, that's where I think billboards tend to get a little bit harder to convert. Now, again, positioning of the billboard makes a big difference. If you're on a freeway where people are going 70 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour, you're really ruling the driver out because they're hopefully not spending time on their phone trying to leave themselves a note or things like that, or paying attention to the billboard instead of paying attention to the road. But again, even the passengers, a lot of times they aren't paying attention to things outside the vehicle. They're paying attention to their phone. So if you're in that situation, I think it makes it even a little bit harder. But if you're in a situation where maybe it's a very prominent billboard in an area of town where people get stopped at a red light or things like that, you may have the opportunity for people, including the driver, to consume the content of that billboard. A couple of things I would say about that is you want to keep the messaging simple. Obviously, people have very limited time to consume it, so it needs to be consumed at a glance. You need to get your point across at a glance and not try to stuff it with too many things, or it's probably not going to be successful. But my thought would be to try to maybe look at a place where somebody's going to be stopped at a red light on a regular basis or things like that, and it's going to be right there in front of them, because then even people that are on their phone may look up from the phone at the red light, whatever, and consume it. So I'm not as big of a fan. And again, I don't have any scientific data behind this because, again, it's not really what we do. We do digital marketing, not really traditional marketing like billboards. But my guess would be that a strategic billboard in a prominent place like that where traffic is going to be stopped is going to be more productive in 2022 than one that's just on the side of the freeway that's being passively consumed as people are driving down the freeway. Again, in general, we don't do a lot of traditional marketing with our clients unless it's something they really are tied into. But I wanted to make sure I answered Haley's question to give her a little bit of insight into that. But again, if you're going to do something like that, same rules apply as any marketing in 2022. You got to get your point across quick. People's attention spans are short. So if you don't grab their attention quickly, they're going to look away from the billboard. They're going to look away from the magazine ad page. They're going to look away from the social media post. So you got to figure out a way to distill your message and get your point across quickly, or people are going to pass it by, whether that's traditionally in a car or flipping through a magazine, or it's socially by the fact that they're scrolling past your post. So again, it comes back to content. I mean, I think all types of marketing can work in the right situation with the right content. There's nothing that necessarily can't work 100%. But again, you've got to definitely grab somebody's attention regardless of the medium you're using and think about how you're doing it. But billboards in general, depending on the cost, I would think there's better things that you can do than a billboard. A billboard's not very targeted. You're sort of showing it to everybody. Again, so back to branding. If branding is what you're trying to do, you're going to get your brand in front of a lot of people, but it's not very targeted. So hopefully that makes sense. I appreciate the question, Haley, and hopefully I did a good job answering that for you. So we're going to bump on to the next question here. If anybody's got any questions or clarifications, again, or new questions, go ahead and put those in, and we will make sure we get to them. The next question that came in is, what is keyword research and why is it important? Man, this is such a great question. So keyword research is actually doing a little bit of, prior to doing SEO on your website, prior to doing anything of that nature, figuring out what people that you're trying to reach are searching for on Google. Is they sit down at their computer and start typing into that Google search bar, what are they searching for? What words are they using? What key phrases are they using? And it may be different than what you think because you're in the industry, you understand the industry, what you think somebody might be putting into Google or what you think a relevant keyword is or an SEO term is may not at all align with what people are actually using. I had a discussion with a client last week about this, and we talked about different things that when you're in an industry, you tend to refer to things in a certain way or talk in a particular language and assume that everybody knows what that is or that that's the type of keywords you need to be SEO'd for. And what you could do if you make that mistake is you can go along and pay money and SEO your website and all those things associated with that, optimize images, everything like that, to perfectly optimize your company for keywords and key phrases that, guess what, nobody is actually typing into Google. So although your SEO is done properly, technically done properly, on the back of your website, you're not getting website traffic because nobody's searching for the things that your website is optimized for. So keyword research is a way to actually go in and find out the search words and search terms that people are actually searching for, so that then you can optimize your website for those search words and search terms and make sure that you're optimizing it for the right things. So how do you do that? How do you do keyword research? There's a lot of tools out there that can help you with this. Paid tools like SEMrush and things like that. But there's also free tools. Google's got one called Keyword Planner. I think it's called Keyword Planner. Google Keyword Planner. It's free. If you have a Google account, you can log into it and you can do that. And there's some limitations to the Google thing, but it's Google, and you're actually trying to optimize your website for their platform, Google. So it's actually a good place to start. And it allows you to search for certain terms and see how much traction they're getting. You might be surprised that you think a certain term is very critical, that you come up at the very top of the list for, and find out that very few people are actually searching for that term. Now, that's going to impact if you do Google AdWords, what your keywords and key phrases are in Google AdWords. You could spend a lot of money coming up for a lot of things that take budget away from you coming up for the most important things. SEO. Are your pages, are your websites optimized for the words that are the most relevant, that are getting the most searches, that are being sought after? So keyword research is critical. I think you owe it to yourself to, if you're going to embark on a Google AdWords campaign or SEO, to kind of understand that. We work with a lot of clients in similar industries or in the same industry. So we kind of know what those keywords and key phrases are and have the ability to jump right in. So we don't spend daily in time doing keyword research, but we do check up occasionally to make sure that we are on par and online with where these particular clients are, especially if it's a new client in an industry that we don't typically do business in. We want to make sure that we're hitting the right terms. So the question was, what is keyword research and why is it important? Hopefully I answered that question. It's, and anybody can put anything, anybody that's tuned in can put something in the comments if you understand that or not. It's kind of a technical thing. It's really pretty simple. It's pretty foundational that you do this, but a lot of people don't do it. And a lot of times we kind of come in to start working with a client, and one of the first things we look at is how their SEO on their website is done often. And often, sometimes the SEO is not done well, but sometimes the SEO is actually done really well. It's just the website is optimized for all the wrong terms. So it's not like the SEO wasn't done. It was just done. It was pointed at the wrong target. You were trying to hit a target over here and it's aimed at a target over there. And you wonder why you're not getting the traction or the traffic to your website that you'd like to get. So I appreciate Steve saying, makes sense. It's not always about, in his case, window tint near me, but more like ceramic window tint. Great. You're talking about a window film industry. We do business with a lot of people in the window film industry. A great example of that is in the window film industry, we often refer to, I'm even saying it right now while we're talking, I'm saying window film. We often use the word window film, but outside of our industry, very few people use the word window film. They use the word window tint, or they use things like that. So we might optimize your residential, your home page for the term residential window film. That might be a common mistake where you've now optimized your page perfectly for residential window film. Problem is, not a lot of people are going in and actually searching when they type into Google residential window film. Guess what they're searching for? Home window tinting, house window tint, tinting my home windows, things like that. That's what they're searching for. So now you've got a perfectly optimized page on your website for residential window film, which technically there's nothing wrong with what you've done, other than that you've aimed yourself completely at the wrong target because people aren't searching for residential window film. So it's critical that before you get busy doing a bunch of SEO, that you'd identify the targets you want to hit, and then all the SEO and all the Google AdWords and things like that flow from that research you've done up front to make sure you're aimed at the right target. So I don't want to belabor the point. I think, you guys probably that are watching either online now or in the future will understand this, but if there's any clarification or questions about that, please let me know, and I'd be happy to answer that. Let me move on to the next question here. I'm keeping my eye out to see if there's any new questions coming in, but I don't see any right now. But so this question is, how do I get good SEO? We're staying on the topic of SEO. How do I get good SEO for multiple locations within one website? It's something we work with a lot of clients on, and we actually have a lot of clients we're doing this for right now. Couple different things. One, when Google searches your website, there's a couple different things I'm going to go into here. When Google crawls your website, it's looking for things that identify where somebody's located, whether it's attached, where we would typically recommend you attach on your contact page or somewhere the map that's generated on your Google business page. That gives Google an idea where you're at. It instantly tells them where you're located, what your region is, things like that. So you definitely want to talk about the area that you're located. The other thing is, if you want to be SEO'd for very specific locations, let's say you're in an area that's kind of in between 4 or 5 other major areas, and you do business in all 4 or 5 of those areas, but you've got to do the SEO on your website. So you're like, okay, how do I have good SEO for 4 or 5 locations when I'm actually the city that I'm listed in, like on my contact page where my shop is at, is not in any of those 4 or 5. I actually go out to people and I do work there. So a couple different things you could do. First of all, consider having a page on your website for each of those 4 or 5 locations. So in addition to your contact page, create a page for your services in each one of those areas, a whole page that actually is specific to that, where it's not just a copy and paste. You've actually created a page. You're using images from that area. You're using, you're using wording about that area. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, you're in Cincinnati, Ohio, but you service customers all the way up in Dayton, Ohio, and down in Lexington, Kentucky, and Louisville, Kentucky. You service customers all those places. So while your address is in Cincinnati, and Google may pick up on that because you're attached to your Google map and everything like that, you want to also be optimized for Dayton, Louisville, and Lexington. You probably want to create 3 additional pages on your website that talk about your products and services in Louisville, Kentucky, in Lexington, Kentucky, in Dayton, Ohio, so that you actually have a page on your website specifically talking about your product and services in those areas, so that Google has something when they crawl your website to say, oh, he does these things in Dayton, Ohio as well. He does these things in Louisville, Kentucky as well. That's going to give Google something to hang on to. When Google crawls your website, if there's nothing on there about Dayton, Ohio, how is Google going to know to populate you up in the search results for Dayton, Ohio? There's nothing on your website that talks about Dayton, Ohio. They're not going to automatically assume, because Dayton is 45 minutes away from Cincinnati, that they should show you in the Dayton results. In fact, they probably will assume to not show you in the Dayton results because you're down in Cincinnati. So you actually have to create some content on your website, some anchor points on your website, for lack of a better term, that tell Google that, hey, we do this work in Dayton as well. We do this work in Louisville as well. We do this work in Lexington as well. If you do that, you give Google a little bit of something to hang on to. The other thing you can do, but you have to do it properly, is to create a Google business listing in those areas. That's going to be a little bit more costly because you actually have to create an actual presence there, whether that is through a shared office space or something like that. If you can actually create a Google business location in Dayton and verify that location, and that won't work typically for post office boxes or UPS store boxes. You actually have to create like a shared office thing to where you can actually say, hey, I have a location that I can do business out of in Dayton, to get it verified. Then you can actually have a Google business listing there. And you can actually, on that Dayton page of your website, include the Dayton Google business map and things like that. That's going to allow you to get a little bit more traction there. So if you're in an area where you do business with a variety of places, there's a couple things you have to do that are going to help you get traction there. You just can't assume, especially if those areas are like what I'm mentioning, Dayton, Louisville, Lexington. Those are populated areas that probably have people in those areas that are doing your product or service too. So if you're in Cincinnati, you're not going to come up at the top of the list above people that already are showing that they're in Dayton, Louisville, or Lexington. You've got to create a situation where you're in the mix in those locations, or you're not going to come up. So I've given you a couple ideas on that. There's a couple other ways to do it. I wouldn't waste your time with UPS stores and things like that, or trying to get verified with the post office box. Google is pretty savvy to that. And in most cases, when people try to do that, I see that those things get not approved, and Google will not allow you to verify a Google business location there with a post office box or a UPS store box or something like that. So I would say save your time if you're not willing to actually set up a shared office space or things like that, where you don't have access to a shared office space that you could use in those areas. You're typically not going to be very successful getting those locations verified. So hope that helps. Again, it's very important if you're in one of those situations that you create something that Google can identify with that shows that you do business in those areas. I saw some things come in, so let me make sure. So Tim asked, on those pages, do you have a drop down for them, or just ready and publish, be able to find them? Tim, it depends. If you want people to see that you do business in those areas from the front of your website, a lot of times, like on your Contact Us tab, you could have like what we would call a waterfall menu that comes down that shows that you have a Dayton, Lexington, Louisville location. And then if you click on that, it'll take you to that specific page. So in that case, it would be visible from the front end publicly. Sometimes you could just create the content on your website and not put it in your menu structure. It's still there when Google crawls it, whether it's in the menu structure or not. So you don't necessarily have to put it in the menu structure, although maybe you would want to. I'm not sure, unless you want to hide the fact, why you might want to hide that. But the most important thing is the content is on your website and it's published. Now, whether you want to show it up front or not is a personal preference thing. Some people do, some people don't. It says, he asks the follow-up question, the menus can get overwhelmed, so that's why I ask. Again, yeah, I think a lot of times what clients we've done will actually have a locations tab in their menu, and they'll list all of them underneath that. But again, the most important thing is that the page is published and it's part of your website. It doesn't need to be in the menu structure. That's going to come down to website design and what your preferences are. But if the web page is published and your website's been submitted to Google to be crawled, that page will be crawled and it'll be part of your overall website SEO, whether it's in the menu structure or not. So it doesn't need to be in the menu structure to work from an SEO perspective. I think that's what you were asking, and I hope hopefully I'm answering that for you properly, Tim. But thanks for the question. And if you have a follow-up, again, just put it in there and I'll see it come up, because it comes up right on the right side. Here's a good one that doesn't have anything to do with SEO. So we'll jump into this one. I think we've got some time. It says, how should I handle when someone comments negatively on a social media post or leaves a negative review? Again, great question. It's something, if you're doing business in 2022, there's a possibility, if you're putting yourself out there, if you're regularly posting, if you're doing business with a lot of people, you stand the chance that you're going to get a bad comment or you're going to get a negative review. How do you handle those things? I've always taken the approach that rather than ignore them or try to delete them or something like that, I would hit them head on. I would look at those as an opportunity to show not necessarily the person that left the negative comment, because you might not be able to win them over for whatever reason, but a lot of other people might be looking in at how you answer that comment or how you respond to that negative review. And what you're really doing at that point is you're making a response for all the onlookers, not necessarily the person that left the negative review or left the negative comment, but everybody who may see it afterwards. So I would respond very positively if it's a negative review and say, hey, I'm sorry you had a negative experience with us. We certainly take pride in making sure we satisfy all of our customers. Da, 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 da. Please reach out to me so we can determine if there's anything we can do to rectify this situation for you. You get the idea. I would respond in a very positive, proactive, not a they're attacking me, so I'm going to attack them back. I would say, I'm sorry you had a negative experience. I'd love to talk to you to where we could figure out what we can do to rectify the situation. That way, everybody that's watching that, not the person you're responding to, is seeing that this company acknowledged the negative comment, acknowledged the negative review, and reached out to the person to see if there was a way they can rectify that. That speaks volumes about your company, and it speaks volumes about how you would treat them if they were to decide to be a customer and something were to go wrong. He attacks you and leaves a negative review, or attacks you and leaves a snide or negative comment, and you immediately hit back and get very defensive. That sends the wrong message to everybody that's watching, looking on, and they're like, okay, now all I see is two people fighting. It's like that old saying, don't fight with a fool, because onlookers don't know which one is the fool. So when you're arguing with somebody, you're not going to make your case online. In many cases, you're better off to try to diffuse the situation, respond in a positive, productive way, try to take the conversation offline, encourage them, say, I'd love to talk to you offline. Can we set up a time for us to talk on the phone or whatever? Pull it offline so anybody that's watching then can see that you've tried to take a proactive step to resolve the issue and you didn't just hit back in a defensive way. So rule number one is I would never respond defensively. I mean, even if somebody's being really crude, I would never respond. How you respond says more about you than what that person said about you. Think about that. How you respond is going to say more to the person watching about you than what the initial poster said about you. So be careful how you respond. Try not to be defensive. Try to be positive. Try to be productive, and invite them to take the conversation offline. And I think you're going to be able to turn that negative comment or negative review into a positive for everybody else that's looking at it, and you can actually use that to your benefit. I'll just leave you with this. It's never, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, it's never a good strategy to respond negatively and defensively to those things. I don't think you ever win as a business owner. I think you only come out looking worse when you engage in that manner. So let me see here. I just want to, so this is a question that came in. It asks, is social media as important? Essentially, I'll boil it down. It's actually quite a long question. I don't want to read the whole thing. We've only got a couple minutes up. It's essentially asking, is social media still as relevant today as it was a couple years ago as far as marketing? And I will answer this because a lot of people say, hey, I'm checked out on social media. I'm not paying attention anymore. I'm not spending as much time on the platforms. And everybody says that. That's a very common when people are polled, that's a very normal thing for people to say. However, the data doesn't bear that out. Facebook is continuing to grow. They're almost at 3 billion users, and their numbers aren't dropping dramatically. I think they actually had a quarter or something where they dropped just slightly, but not significantly. But the numbers are still there. In fact, the numbers say that the average person in the United States is spending almost 90 minutes a day on some sort of social media platform, whether that's TikTok, whether that's Instagram Reels, whether that's Facebook, 90 minutes a day. I mean, we only have 24 hours in a day, and people on average are spending an hour and a half of that 24 hours engaging in social media in some way. So the numbers just don't bear out that people aren't on social media as much. Now, what's happening, and we've talked about this in Marketing Mondays in the past, is people are getting bombarded with more and more and more noise. They're seeing more and more videos, more and more posts, more and more ads. So in order to stand out, it's a little bit harder today than it was a couple years ago. They took away some targeting, so it's a little bit more. You have to be a little bit more savvy to target people properly than you used to have to be. So between people being hit with more noise and the targeting not being as precise as it was, people might not be getting the results they were getting 2 years ago. So the common refrain is oh, social media is not working for me anymore. Well, without looking at how you're running your campaigns, the reality is it's probably more likely that you're doing the same thing you were doing 2 years ago, and that's not as effective today as it was 2 years ago. And because of that, you're saying it's not working for you anymore. But the reality is you haven't evolved your strategy to be effective in 2022 when you're using a 2020 strategy to try to be effective in 2022. Again, watch a couple of the past episodes. I've talked just in the last couple episodes about the importance of creating a thumb pause moment, creating a situation where your content stands out. I've given very practical steps on how to do that. If you're not doing that in 2022, you can run all the ads you want. You can do all the posting you want, and people are going to scroll right by. And you're going to say social media doesn't work anymore. And the reality is you're just not doing social media properly in 2022 to get the results. Is it harder? Yes, it is harder. You have to be better at targeting than you used to have to be. You have to be a little bit more savvy with your targeting. You have to be better with your content creation. You have to create content people want to consume. So is it harder? Yes. But does it mean that social media doesn't work? Absolutely not. Works every day. It works for large corporations. It works for small businesses. You just have to use it properly. So with that, I am right up against the half an hour. I appreciate everybody starting their Monday morning with me. I hope everybody listening in, either now or even if you listen in the future, has a terrific Monday, has a terrific week. I appreciate all the comments. I appreciate the questions that continue to come in through the week. So I'm glad everybody tuning in is finding this beneficial. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great week, everybody. Take care. Bye.